Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Pandora. So, in this episode, obviously we get a little more insight into, the whole situation, obviously during, Earth and Zatar's war 22 years ago. Obviously, I think that was kind of, probably, I guess, the beginnings of the war, or maybe the fever pitch point of the, war. But we have Osborn and Shrawl going after Pandora, because obviously they're trying to stop her before she gets to the portal, before she can go tell the ancients to wipe out, their universe. Luckily, they were able to stop her. But obviously, present day, you have Jax and Xander trying to tell the Admiral, hey, we might need my help from my uncle because we need to find a way to get to these ancients so that we can stop all this. But the Admiral doesn't believe all this because she thinks it's just BS, because Osborn, caused a lot of casualties and he caused a lot of issues. So she it's understandable why you don't want to believe him, but considering other people are there, but I guess in her mind, it's like, Xander used to be underneath him, so you'd want him have a little leniency, and obviously Jax being his niece would want the same thing as well. But it's like, your stubbornness in this particular situation is just it's potentially going to lead to this universe getting destroyed. So they have very few options except to basically break Osborn out because they need him, because he's the only one that would potentially know a way to get to the ancients. So for him, he plans on taking them to the planet that he found Jax on all those years ago. Luckily, it will help from Raylan and Mata. They're able to break him out, and they end up going to a planet that basically the name translates to demon. So that's super pleasant sounding. But obviously, because of the status of the planet too, because there's kind of a storm overhead, they can't actually land. So they basically have to I forgot what they called it necessarily, but basically I think they just called it planet falling, didn't they? Which was interesting. I also love Osborn being like, yeah, because if you don't get it right, you'll basically hit the planet and get pancaked. And she's like, oh, anything else you want to say that's very uplifting right now, Uncle? Because at the same time, it's interesting, too, because there's the whole situation, because obviously Jax, I guess being in proximity and everything, triggered, some memories that the previous Pandora, the one that's dead now, had. And I thought it was interesting, because obviously for her, it's she said, Jax was saying that Pandora hadn't 100% made up her mind to say, this universe wasn't worth keeping around, that basically because of what Osborn and Shrawl did locking her in that box, that's what set her down the path of being screw humanity. It's that basically their actions in trying to stop her and save humanity ended up dooming humanity. Which they're kind of no, Osborn did what he needed to protect us. And it's Jax is kind of we don't know for sure what was in her head, whether or not she was going to say, she was going to make a judgment to them, but we don't know exactly what that judgment was. They were under the assumption it was about wiping out not just humanity, but all of this universe, but maybe that wasn't the case. It's still unclear. But obviously them landing, obviously it was a bumpy ride because Jax almost got, she got thrown off course, but luckily they all landed. I thought I didn't know what to expect with how they were going to land. I thought they were going to put up some last minute force field. What I mean, they're basically soft cushions that they basically threw down at the last minute to make sure they don't hit the planet hard. But also I thought it was kind of interesting the splitting up of Mata and Jax going together. I was I would have expected the couples to go off together, but then it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Because it didn't get shown in the episode, but I was last time we saw Jax was pretty upset with Xander, but it's oh no, it's still there. Because obviously, Jax and Mata have their whole conversation. I even love Mata being yeah, I actually didn't like you the first time. Honestly, I really, really didn't like you. She's oh, sure. Oh, you did? You didn't? And she's oh, that's human sarcasm, isn't it? It's yep, you nailed it. And it's but she's yeah, but I like you now, Jackson. Jackson's thanks, Mata. I liked you always. But it's also because, for her, it's a situation that obviously Raylan is her husband, but also it came about for a bit of jealousy because, obviously Raylan kind of has feelings for you, but she was no, you're his wife, he loves you. But that's what kind of complicated things because Raylan didn't tell Jax about, like, hey, because there was something there, whether Jax is willing to really admit it or not, there was definitely something there. But then, it's like, no, he's my friend, and him not telling me everything, just for her, it's like she felt like Raylan could be someone that she could trust, and just to find out that he was hiding something like that, it's like, you don't hide something so important. But even Mata is like, well, what about Xander? Xander, obviously, season 1 did nothing but hide stuff from you. Granted, he eventually told you stuff, but it's like, he hid a lot from you, but she was like, it's different. It's like, because I'm guessing that's supposed to represent the fact is that Raylan, she has deeper bonds with Raylan than she does potentially Xander. I mean, to be fair, he killed a woman that looks just like her in front of her, and especially in Jax's mind, cold blood wise. So it makes you kind of go like, you killed a version of me in cold blood, so that's going to taint the relationship a little bit. I think it's just supposed to signify that there was even something, like she felt something maybe stronger for Raylan anyway. I mean, it was her love life was complicated in season 1 because there was the whole Greg situation. Wasn't that his name, Greg? I believe so. It's been a while. The whole Xander thing and Raylan. So it was just kind of, I mean, obviously the whole Greg situation played out the way it did, but obviously that got turned back around, but tangents and all that. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting insight to that whole thing, and even Mata, like, being the one to kind of point things out, of being like, oh, like, But Jax is trying to make it seem like it's not more than that. But obviously, like, even Raylan kind of brings it up later on to Xander about the fact is of like, yeah, we can tell ever since we left Clayton's world that your relationship hasn't quite been the same. He's like, yeah, you have to earn back her trust, which Raylan's like, I get that. He's like, I know it because of that other side of the conversation, him adding his, it adds a context to this for him being like, yeah, I definitely understand that more so than anyone, kind of the hard work it takes to get Jax's trust back. But at the same time, they're fighting those aliens that are protecting the portal. There's also the situation where, obviously, because the Admiral was saying that Earth had no place to interfere because the wave was going towards Zatar. But obviously Zatar was lining up its forces trying to fight back. But obviously Jax and everyone knows that wasn't going to do anything because this isn't something that military might can fight. Jax and them are the only hope for stopping all of this. But sadly, we see like that entire armada, like their line of defense get wiped out in an instance. There was no stopping it. So it's like this is our only option. I didn't actually know what to expect because Osborn was also kind of like, I think it looked like they're kind of going back and kind of redeeming Osborn a little bit too, because he was kind of a shady douchebag last season. Because basically he's like, oh, when it's all said and done, I'm going to bounce because I'm not going to go back just to have the Admiral arrest me again. But he's like, no matter where I am, I'll always be nearby to look after you because I've always cared about you, which is like very sweet because like you make it seem, because season 1 made it seem like he never gave a rat's tail about her, that she was always, because in his mind, I guess because of who she is and just the destiny of her being a Pandora, basically being the future deciding factor. But at the same time, he's the one that set this all in motion with like giving Pandora to his, giving Jax to his sister so that she can be raised to be like, hey, to have an affinity for humanity and to have an affinity for this universe and will not want it destroyed. So it kind of worked out in the end, but it almost kind of, I guess you can almost make the argument it backfires, considering the fact is that her mom was kind of working with the Pandora that was potentially going to destroy this world, which once again we still don't 100% know her and Tierney's motives behind everything that they do, what they necessarily have planned, especially now that the other Pandora is dead. I'm sure that didn't interfere with their plans. It's just kind of like they probably co-opted with that situation to get their own, it was a means to an end for their own, situations. But circling back to the main plot of things, I thought it was kind of interesting how they also like show you like, I guess because this is where Jax was born, so there is something there that like triggers those memories that she can remember, like being a baby and like Osborn and him having her and this being where she was dropped off. And obviously, so she knows, obviously Osborn ends up figuring out where the portal is, and obviously Mata's like, no, the portal's not this way, like, let me search the place first, but, Jax is like, no, I got it. And lo and behold, she does end up taking them to the portal because it's like it's through the obstacle. She remembers it because this all ties back to like her back on New Portland at the beginning of the series, like the message that was read, that no one could translate, for it to kind of come full circle like this in that regard is kind of neat. While at the same time, Raylan and Xander are fighting other creatures, along with some creature that just like randomly pops up. I guess it was just something that exists on that planet. Luckily, I love the fact that Raylan was chasing after it with the weapon he picked up from that other creature, and just kind of kills it off screen. Comes back, it's like, all right, now let's go find Jackson, my wife. My wife. I don't know. Anytime I say the term "my wife," I have to say it like I don't even know what that's a reference to. It's just stuck in my head. My wife. Like that in particular inflection and whatever tangents and all that. This isn't the time for that. Sorry. But luckily they go through the port. It's like, oh, we're going to see the ancients, and then they end up in front of a motel. And I'm like, isn't this Earth? I'm like, what? And then it's some dude that's like, oh, hey, you only have one vacancy. Brings him inside, and there's a clone of him, and then there's another clone, which I also thought was kind of interesting too when they had her. Pandora, they had Jack sign in, and she was like, I didn't pay as close attention to the numbers as I should have, but she was like 40 something, because obviously all the other previous Pandoras had signed in, and then it's all these different versions of the same dude. I'm like, oh, it's interesting considering it's like, are you the ancients? And he was like, oh, it's not right to ask someone about their age. Didn't they teach you anything at that school of yours? So now it's like, what? I won't like, to me, that moment, it's like when those last couple minutes, I was like, this show went from like sci-fi to like trippy. And when I mean trippy, I mean, it immediately made me think, I was like, especially the room they end up at the end of the episode, I'm like, that looks like some Twin Peaks shit. The dude just sitting in the chair, I'm like, is this supposed, and they're like the bellhop and everything, I'm like, is this supposed to be Twin Peaks-ish? It looks like it. I was like, this screams Twin Peaks right here, which is nuts. Because it's like, oh yeah, Judson, how long have you been working here? He's like, oh yeah, since the beginning. They walk past a room with like giant birds, and it's like, what? Like I said, it's some weird Twin Peaks stuff, and then it's the whole situation of like, oh, you can't possibly see what's in my mind, and he's like, oh, we can't, and then it cuts back to like just Jax's brain because he can literally see her brain. It's like, dude, it was weird and trippy. I was like, what? So now it also comes down to, all right, do you believe that humanity, that without a doubt, do you believe this universe is worth saving? But Jax doesn't fully believe it. Like, even then, she's like, even if I do have doubts and stuff like that, like basically trying to say, like, nothing and no one's perfect. So even if I have doubts, but Mata herself has no doubts, but it's like, we can't read you like we could read a Pandora. So now it's kind of like, they're kind of screwed over in this regard, but it's like, obviously it's like Jax is very different from every other Pandora. So, I mean, obviously because she was raised like, by humans and stuff like that. So it's like the ancients came to the decision that they're willing, which we never actually got to see them. I guess maybe these are those aliens who are the guardians of the, ancients, but now they're in the form of, maybe this is what they look like in that world, or I don't know. Maybe they figured, maybe maybe it's kind of like the angels from like Supernatural. Our real form is just too much for you to comprehend, so we'll manifest ourselves like this, or maybe that's what they actually look like. I have no idea. It doesn't seem like they're necessarily the ancients. It just seems like they're kind of the middlemen when it comes to the ancients. But it's like, all right, we'll give you more time to prove but it's like, oh yeah, you and the, what was it? Didn't they say like 6 races or whatever? And it's like, what? No, there's only 5. And then that kind of got broken down. And then it's the whole situation of like, you have like, what was it, like 120 some days. So it's like, you have like a couple months to kind of prove that. But like, the price for it is to basically to save Zatar and everything is that Mata had to stay. And to, you have Jax being like, no, I'm the Pandora. I should be the one to stay. This is my destiny. Is like, yes, normally, but you're the one that has doubts. She isn't. So I was under the impression that until all of this is resolved, Mata had to stay. But I don't know whether that I misinterpreted that, because it seemed like it might have been more so she has to permanently stay. It seems like it was almost like saying goodbye. I don't know. I should have, because I had this inkling the moment she went off with Jax. I was like, are they going to kill her off? I was like, oh, that sucked. But especially after her and because she even said to Jax that like Raylan loves you, and she's like, and that's okay. He loves me, yes, but he also loves you too. And she's like, that's okay. And even Jax was like, okay, just when I think I had you guys figured out, you Zatarians just kind of knock it out of the park, just kind of like switching things up to make it go like, oh, I guess I just don't have this as figured out as I thought I did. But obviously Jax gets sent back, and obviously like, you know, Raylan being like, where's my wife, you know, and it's just like, because you know that's going to eat at Raylan, because Marta was saying like, let's leave, and he's the one that wanted to stay just to check on everyone, to keep, you know, he's the one that kept putting off them leaving, so he's probably going to blame himself. There's probably also going to be a little resentment towards Jax. It's because, you know, because Jax kept being worried the entire episode, like, what if I don't have the right thing to say? Everyone say I'm going to have the right thing to say, but it's like, when the time came, she didn't, because she still had her doubts about everything. She wasn't 100% sure, and, you know, she'll probably, like, take that upon herself to be like, Mata ended up paying the price because of that, you know? Raylan now pays the price because of that. So I'm curious to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Zatara has been saved, but like I said, there's a price, and they still have a time limit. Yeah, they've got an extension, but beyond that, you know, because obviously there's still, like I said, there's other pieces to play it, like, you know, what Eve, well, Tierney's still out there, because obviously Eve has been captured, but it's like, but Eve acts like this is exactly where she wants to be. You know, what's Tierney up to? Obviously, you've got the whole situation with Harlan, him scheming and plotting himself. You know, it's going to be interesting to see where all this goes from here. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.